Well, a pleasant Monday morning or afternoon now, I guess it is, to you and yours, and I hope you are having an excellent start to your week, and I hope you had an incredible weekend as well. Welcome into the PHLY Phillies podcast here on PHLY. Tyler Zulli with you for the next half an hour. Andrew Frazier with us as well, producing today's show. A unfortunate bit of news to start the show today. The Phillies and Pirates have been rained out down in Clearwater, or down in Florida, I should say. And I don't blame the weather, or I think the Phillies weren't blaming the weather either, because I wouldn't want to face Paul Skeens either. Although it would have been really cool to get to see Paul Skeens up close. I imagine he probably would have thrown 2 innings today, but anytime you get an opportunity to watch a guy who's to me, on the precipice of just absolute superstardom in Major League Baseball, I think it's a really cool opportunity. Even if it is in spring training, it's only for a handful of innings. I don't know if anybody got to see the video of him throwing live BP to Adam Frazier a couple of weeks ago, but my goodness, the 2-seam run that he has is just, it's out of this world. It's just, I posted it on my personal account. I posted it on the PHLY Phillies account. The run that he gets on his 2-seam is just disgusting. He is a budding superstar. And no surprise, he was tasked with being the all-star starter last season in his rookie year. No surprise that he's one of the front runners to be a Cy Young candidate in the National League this season. But unfortunately, we will not get to see Paul Skeens today. Phillies and the Pirates are rained out. But I wanted to start today's show, and I'm going to preface this show by saying this. This is going to feel like a sports talk radio segment. And I mean that with no disrespect to anybody, my former colleagues and my friends in sports talk radio. I say this because this is the type of segment that I would do in a sports talk radio session. It's more open-ended. It's more question. It's more leaving it up for interpretation and having conversations with you in the chat and giving my feelings about this certain topic. I've seen a lot of people over the last couple of months specifically, especially since Juan Soto signed in New York. I've seen a lot of people have the conversation of, this is a quiet offseason for the Phillies. And I think that that's a natural conversation to have, but I think where it starts to deviate into a place that I'm not willing to go is that the Phillies are getting leapt or lapped, or the Mets went out and spent money, the Dodgers continue to spend money, the fill in the blank has spent money. The Diamondbacks spent some money this offseason in acquiring Corbin Burns. You fill in the blanks as to who went out and spent money. And the Phillies did have a relatively quiet offseason, which is objectively true. But I do think the one thing that I am trying to temper for a lot of people, because I think immediately the thought process is, well, they're running it back. This is a waste of a year. You saw what happened in the last 2 seasons, and you saw how they floundered down the stretch, and they didn't make a whole lot of moves. So therefore, just putting 2 and 2 together for somehow means that this team is not going to be a good team. I want to stop that narrative for a second. This team should still be a good team. Now, I will say, I think internal expectations are fair to have with things like selectivity. We talked about Trea Turner leading off at the top of the lineup last week, and what does that mean for his plate approach? He's had back-to-back seasons of the highest chase rates of his career. 2 Phillies last season finished in the top 10 of the amount of first pitch swings, or the amount of first pitches that they swung at. Now, one of them was Bryce Harper, so he had a pretty darn good year. You can maybe throw that out just a little bit as a guy who likes to be uber aggressive. The other was Nick Castellanos. So when you look at Castellanos, he was in the bottom 6 percentile for the 4th consecutive season in chase rates and swung at the first pitch for more than 51% of his at-bats last season. Internally, I think those conversations are very fair. Does Ranger Suarez bounce back? What do you get in terms of a healthy season from Jesus Luzardo? Can Christopher Sanchez build on an excellent 2024? Does Aaron Nola continue to be a workhorse? All of those questions, I think, are fair internal monologues to have. I think it's the external factors that I take the largest gripe with, if you will. It was a quiet offseason. I'll say it again, and I'll say it many, many times. But I think it was always going to be a relatively quiet offseason for the Phillies. They weren't fiscally going to be major players in the free agent market unless John Middleton and the staff decided that they were just going to blow through the luxury tax threshold and just not give a damn about the money that they were spending. I guess it's a plausibility, but I think the honest, objective truth to the matter was this was going to be a fiscally quiet offseason. Now, over the last 5 seasons, dating back to 2021, heading into this 2025 season, the Phillies have ranked fifth or more, I guess. I'm trying to decide how you would want to phrase that. They were fifth or higher in salary and team payroll throughout Major League Baseball each of the last 5 seasons. 2021, $190 million. They ranked fifth. 2022, $244 million. They ranked fourth. 2023, they spent an extra $1 million, $245 million. They ranked fifth. Last season, they were up another million, $246 million. They ranked fourth. And 2025, this upcoming season, their projected payroll is $279 million, which ranks third across Major League Baseball. To put that into perspective, this year's tax threshold is $241 million. That means the Phillies right now are about $38 million over the luxury tax threshold. They've also been over that number, or what the luxury tax number was, for each of the last 3 seasons, meaning that they're now at a clip of 50% extra tax on every dollar spent. So if you take $279 million and you subtract the $241 million tax threshold, that leaves you with $38 million. Now, of course, you split that by 50%, and it's an extra $19 million in tax threshold that they're going to be paying in 2025. So the Phillies' monetary spending is actually closer to $298 million for the 2025 season. Now, the salary numbers are $278, and you add the 18, it gets you to nearly $300 million. The Phillies are spending nearly $300 million on their payroll this season. And I understand everybody likes to say, it's not my money, it's John Middleton's money. There's no salary cap. If you're willing to go through the tax threshold, if you're willing to spend the money, then so be it. Go and spend the money. Can't take it with you. And I understand that teams are doing it. The Mets are going to have a super high payroll. Quite frankly, I could still see the Mets making a last-minute move. The Dodgers are going to have a super high payroll, even though a ridiculous amount of their money is deferred to, 2085, till when our great-great-grandchildren are going to be watching the Dodgers play. Shohei Ohtani is going to be making money. The Texas Rangers, the Toronto Blue Jays, the New York Yankees, the Houston Astros, the Atlanta Braves all have spent $200 million or more heading into this season. The Padres and Angels, actually, surprisingly, are just short. The point is, the Phillies are amongst the league's most competitive teams in terms of spending money. Allocation of money is a different conversation. I understand we're going to talk about one player in particular that allocation of funds would be really nice to have those exact $18 million back for 2024 or 2025 and 2026. But the Phillies have spent money in each of the last 5 seasons. The next step in this conversation is not just how much money they're spending or how much tax threshold they're spending, but it's about the threshold cap and over. $40 million over the luxury tax threshold results in your highest draft pick next season moving back 10 spots. That's just something I don't think the Phillies are going to want to do. They've done a pretty good job of hitting late in the first round over their last draft, specifically on a player like Bryson Stott, specifically more so maybe in the coming years on a player like Aiden Miller. But I don't think they're going to willingly move over that $40 million threshold for a middling player. If they were going to do it, I think it would the likelier scenario for me would have been via the trade market. They would have gone and acquired a player like Garrett Crochet and then extended him at some point. That's where you would have made your mark. That's where they would have said, bleep the money, bleep the threshold, bleep the tax, the draft pick. We're going all in and we're spending the money. I don't think they were going to do it in this scenario. If they were going to make a around the edges move, if they were going to sign a fourth outfielder or another reliever or a fifth starter before every other deal came into fruition. Over the last couple of years, Zach Wheeler's extension kicks in this year. I believe it's $42 million this season. Last year, they extended Aaron Nola to a long-term deal. They traded for JT Realmuto and extended him back in 2022. This is the final year of his extension, the contract extension. Over the last couple of years, they've signed Trea Turner, Kyle Schwarber, Nick Castellanos, and Bryce Harper to long-term deals in the offseason dating back to 2019. This team has spent money, and they've had a willingness to win. Hasn't gotten them over the finish line. And again, the internal conversation is something that I think that you can have, and you're justified in having it. But this team has willingly spent money each of the last 5 seasons to get into a spot where they're a consistent winner. And what do I mean by a consistent winner? A playoff team each of the last 3 seasons, looking to do it for the 4th consecutive year. And a team that, when you look at them on paper, should be competitive across the landscape of Major League Baseball. There really was never any tangible move for this team in terms of spending money, unless that tangibility came in the terms of a trade. The problem with that is, I think trades, monetarily speaking, for this team were threefold. Other teams were going to want one of your players on a long-term deal. B, it was a player that you wanted to give up. And C, you got return on value for said player. All of those 3 things, I think, had to be true for you to facilitate a trade in which one of your higher term, higher deal, higher money AAV type of players were going to be moved. So, in theory, what were the, quote, movable contracts this year, this offseason specifically? I think there's 3, and we'll get into the 4th, but I think there's 3 guys that other teams may theoretically have wanted. Nick Castellanos, who's got 2 years and $40 million left on his deal. Kyle Schwarber, who's on the final year of his deal with $20 million remaining. And JT Realmuto, who's on the final year of his extension with $23.8 million left on his contract. Now, let me ask you, heading into this season, are any of those guys, A, players that the Phillies wanted to move, were willing to move, and B, were they players that you wanted to move? Remove JT Realmuto from the conversation. They don't have an answer at catcher behind him. Marchand is not your everyday catcher yet. Stubbs is not the everyday answer. So unless you were able to bring in a catcher on a bridge deal to become someone who you feel is good for the next year or two, and I don't mean good in terms of statistics, I mean good as could be an everyday catcher where you're bringing in a type of Kyle Higashioka type of catcher, pair him with a power-hitting Gary Sanchez. You know what I mean? Like, those options, unless you were doing that, you can remove JT Realmuto from the conversation. So it leaves you with Nick Castellanos and Kyle Schwarber. The Phillies don't want to move Kyle Schwarber either. He's on the final year of his deal. He's a catalyst for this team. And whether he hits in the leadoff spot or 2nd or 4th for this team, he's going to play 150-plus games as the team's designated hitter, sprinkle in a handful of games in left field. I shudder at that theory, but he might. And he's going to probably play 150 to 155 games for the Phillies this season and be an important piece of the top 4 for this lineup. So that leaves you with Nick Castellanos as the only true monetary movable piece heading into this offseason. And I don't think the Phillies were super hesitant to move him, or I think the Phillies were super hesitant to move him as well. Probably the likeliest of the 3, but I don't think likely being the right word. I just think likeliest of the 3 is the right word. Then we get to the final contract of movable high money. Absolutely nobody was willing to take Taijuan Walker's 2 years and $36 million unless the Phillies ate a sizable chunk of that money. And then it kind of becomes somewhat of a moot point anyway, because if there's $18 million this season and the Phillies are eating 10 or 12 of it, you're only removing $6 million near that luxury tax threshold. So in reality, it's $9 million spent. It's $6 million in salary play. And it gets you to $8-ish million removed from the tax threshold. Maybe you were able to bring in another reliever for $8 million. But the likely scenario of trading Taijuan Walker doesn't seem that likely either, because I don't think anybody was going to take that contract. And I don't think anybody's going to take that contract until perhaps next offseason, when it's 1 year left and a team's taking a stab at a major league pitcher. But I'm not sure in this scenario Taijuan Walker is a major league pitcher. So, with all of that being said, everybody else is either under team control and you're not giving them up, or under contracts that are either no trade clause or unmovable. The Phillies' likeliest scenario this entire offseason, whether you like it or don't, was to run this thing back. That was always seemingly the play. Improve around the edges if possible. Replenish and replace the guys that you're going to lose. Speaking of which, they didn't do entirely, and we're going to get to that in just a second, and run it back with a core that's making a ton of money and has been objectively successful, even if they've failed at the ultimate goal, which was to win a World Series. So, with that being said, you bring in Max Kepler, you bring in Jordan Romano, you sign Joe Ross, and your big acquisition of the offseason is Jesus Luzardo, who I think is an excellent move. I was bullish on Starlin Caba as a defender. I don't know what he's going to become as an everyday offensive player. And I was not a huge Amarian Boyd fan from what I was able to see I think he's an incredible athlete, good defender, great speed. Not sure he becomes that a major league hitter at any point in his career. I think that was an excellent move by the Phillies and Dave Dombrowski. But outside of that, you brought in guys on one-year deals, relatively cheap monetary investments. Joe Ross, a couple $1 million. Max Kepler, $10 million. Jordan Romano, 8 and some change. The one argument that I think is fair is the lack of addressing the bullpen. The Phillies spent $12.5 million on Jordan Romano and Joe Ross, and I've been on the record as being worried about the reclamation project that Jordan Romano is. Ross is fine for $4 million, but what's his role? Is he the swingman? Probably the case. Then you're talking about what's the deal with Taijuan Walker. It's a slippery slope when it comes to the bullpen conversation. If Joe Ross is your swingman, and if Jordan Romano hits, that's $12.5 million that I think are fairly well spent. But my concern is I don't know if Jordan Romano is going to return to form. Arthroscopic elbow surgery and ramping up back to velocity and becoming the all-star closer that he was in 2022 and 2023 feels like it may be a long way off. I don't know what type of player to expect from Jordan Romano in 2025. So for $8.5 million, I should feel a little bit more comfortable with the reliever that they've acquired than the guy that I do. That tells me that they have faith in Orion Kerkering elevating his game. That tells me they have continued faith in Matt Strahm. And that tells me, I think, most importantly, they believe that Jose Alvarado can be a everyday, high-leverage, return-to-form left-handed pitcher for them out of the bullpen. The guy that he was in 2023, the guy that he was in the back half of 2022 after he returned from Lehigh Valley from his assignment. That's a lot of ifs for the bullpen. So I totally understand if you have questions and concerns surrounding this bullpen. I think it's objectively worse than it was a season ago. Losing Hoffman is a big deal. I think even if you're not a huge Estevez fan, I think losing consistency with Estevez is also a big deal. If you're going to question one particular group, I think the bullpen is the fairest one to question. Outside of a trade, to kind of wrap this thing up, outside of a trade, I think this team is relatively monetarily stuck. So nothing kind of felt like the plan. I shouldn't say nothing, but nothing of merit felt like kind of the plan all along. I'm not saying you don't have a right to complain if you feel like the team is incomplete, but I do think that the team is going to be relatively competitive, and they have spent their money each of the last 4 off seasons to get to this point. So to wrap this whole conversation up, and I know that's a really long-winded conversation, to wrap this whole conversation piece up, I think the overarching conversation here is that you have a right to have pieces of this team that you want to question. I'm questioning the bullpen. If you're questioning chase rates, selectivity, roster or lineup construction, they're all fair points to make. The one thing I wouldn't do is question if this team has done enough because of the relative quiet nature of the 2025 offseason. So we'll talk more about it in just a second, because I do think that this team still is a playoff team. It's one of the 6 best teams in the National League. And I'm going to kind of lay out a scenario in which hopefully I can make you feel a little bit better heading into 2025 if you are somebody who feels there was a objectively quiet offseason. We'll talk about our bowl predictions for the American League East, and we'll wrap up today's show with a good heartfelt moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about some of our friends here at PHLY. And that, of course, is our friends over at Bet365, because whatever the moment, it is never ordinary at Bet365, and 90 million users worldwide will attest to that. Bet365 offers you 780,000 live-streamed events each year, and one of the great offers across the NHL and NBA is the early payout offer. So you don't have to worry about a late comeback in an NHL or NBA game. In the NBA, if your team goes up by 20 points, at any point you get an instant payout on straight bets and parlay selections marked as winners. The same could be said for the NHL. If your team is up by 3 goals or more, same outcome applies. You automatically will win your straight bet in that regard. NBA tip-off continues. You have NBA tip-off Tuesdays. That comes up tomorrow. If you bet a qualifying parlay of $20 or more on tomorrow's NBA action, you'll get $25 in bonus bets. You'll continue to get great offers from Bet365 as baseball starts to get underway, as playoffs begin, as college hoops postseason begins as well. And breaking news from Bet365, new customers now get $100 in bonus bets when you bet $5, win or lose. So sign up, use the code PHLY365, deposit $10 and place a bet for $5 to get $100 in bonus bets, whether you win or you lose. Bonus bets can be used on spreads, totals, player props, futures, and so much more. Whatever the moment, it is never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 and physically located in PA. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, TrueMark Financial, if you want to get ahead or catch back up on some of your finances from the holidays. It does feel like the holidays have been forever ago, but maybe your credit card balance from the holidays still is very important and pressing. You could pay that off faster with 0 interest until 2026 with our friends over at TrueMark Financial. They are offering 0 interest on balance transfers for the next 12 months. All of your payments will go towards your balance and not just covering interest. But you do have to act fast. You only have 4 more days to apply. You have to apply by February 28th to get in on this offer. Transfer your existing balance from another institution to a TrueMark Visa credit card and take advantage of this incredible offer. Visit TrueMark.com/compare for full details and to apply today. TrueMark Financial, federally insured by the NCUA, equal opportunity lender. Terms and conditions apply. All loans are subject to approval. 3% balance transfer fee applies. Standard rate applies after the promotion. All right, welcome back to the PHLY Phillies podcast here on PHLY. Tyler Zulli and Andrew Frazier with you for another 10 minutes or so. Before we get to our bold prediction for the American League East, I broke this playoff scenario down for you. And by the way, I want to send a shout out to everybody in the chat that's hanging out with us. John Peace, K-Red, Beyond the Bank, Phillies Pod, Pat Ryan. Saw some other names. Andrew, would you mind just scrolling up for me for a second just to give everybody a shout out? Frank Barber in the chat, Chris Slemmer in the chat. Appreciate all of you for checking us out here on this Monday afternoon. I laid this piece out to make maybe you feel a little bit better about the playoffs, which feel like it should be a foregone conclusion for this Phillies team. And if that's the baseline threshold, and you want more, again, totally understandable. But I think that this is the easy way to look at it. There's 7 playoff teams in the National League each season. Now, 2 playoff spots the Phillies could never win. It's the National League Central Division winner and the National League West Division winner. No duh, right? So really, that gets you down to 5 remaining spots. 1, you have a 20% chance of winning just on the onset of being one of 5 teams in the National League East. I bet you that number is probably a little bit higher because the Marlins will be under 20%, as will the Nationals be under 20%. So I bet you the Phillies, the Mets, and the Braves, without knowing exactly what the percentage totals are, I bet you those are a little bit higher than actually 20%. But even if you don't win the East, that leaves you with 3 spots for 12 non-division winners. How many of those 12 teams are unlikely playoff teams? 4, maybe 5. Right off the rip, Colorado, Miami. I don't think Pittsburgh's a playoff team. I think St. Louis stinks. I don't think they're a playoff team. And I think one team that I think is going to be a difficult out this year, but is not ready to be a playoff team, is the Nationals. So that gives you 4 or 5 teams right there off the jump that you can probably remove from the conversation. Now, that really leaves you 3 spots for 7 or 8 teams. The Phillies, to me, are one of the 3 best of these final remaining 7 or 8 teams. And in fact, I think the Phillies are one of the 6 best teams in the National League. If you ask me right now who the 6 best teams in the National League are, I would say 3 of them reside in the East and 3 of them reside in the West. I think it's the Braves, Phillies, and Mets in the East, and I think it's the Dodgers, Diamondbacks, and Padres in the West. I'm not particularly bullish on the Central this year. I think the Cubs are going to win it, if you ask me right now. I think the Reds could be a play for a dark horse candidate for a playoff team, but I think Pittsburgh's not very good. I don't think Milwaukee's very good, and I don't think St. Louis is very good. So, to me, the overarching likelihood that the Phillies are a playoff team is pretty high. If that's your floor, then that's fair. But to me, I think that this is going to be a very good team again. 90, 91, 92 wins is not outside the realm of possibility with a ceiling of maybe 95, 96 type of wins. I think the Braves are going to be better than they were a season ago, despite the fact that they were battling for a playoff spot down the stretch. The Mets, of course, have improved and were a playoff team and beat you in the NLDS last year. In the ALDS last year, NLDS, last year. The National League is going to be good. There's no question in my mind. The National League East, at least, is going to be good. I think the Phillies will be right in that conversation as one of the 3 wildcard teams in the National League. All right, let's get to the bold predictions of the American League East. I toyed with one as one player as a long shot to be named the MVP of the American League, and I think I may put a couple of bucks down on this just because I like 3,000 to 1 odds. But I'm not going to go with this one. But that one was, I think Rafael Devers has a legitimate chance at winning the American League MVP this year, especially if he is in the field, because of the fact that I think and let me rephrase that. I think voters are hesitant to vote for an MVP to win the MVP as a DH. Shohei Ohtani did it for the first time, and he had to run away with it to have a DH in the conversation, even though I personally would have voted him from Jump Street. If Rafael Devers moves off of third base, even though he's a dreadful third baseman, I think he'll have a better chance. I think he has a better chance as a third baseman to win the MVP than he does as a DH. With that being said, 3,000 to 1 intrigues me for a team that I think is going to be pretty good, and he is going to be their catalyst. But I ended up going with this. I think this is the final year for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Bo Bichette on the Toronto Blue Jays. And I think they lose at least one of them for absolutely nothing this offseason. I think the likelier scenario is that they lose Vlad Guerrero Jr. for nothing this offseason. This is going to be their final hurrah in the American League East and in the American League with this team. They've been projected to be good for each of the last 3 years and have floundered for different reasons, pitching reasons, health reasons, whatever, you name it. They have not been the team that many have expected them to be with the rising stars that we expected them to have. Bo Bichette had an injury-plagued season, and I'm worried that maybe his metrics, his ridiculous BABIP over the 3 or 4 years prior to his injury, maybe he started to catch up to him a little bit. I think Vlad Guerrero signs elsewhere in the American League, and I think he signs in Boston next season. But I think they're going to lose Vlad Guerrero for nothing, and I think they trade Bo Bichette at the trade deadline on the final year of his deal, and another team extends Bo Bichette in 2026. I think the Blue Jays are going to lose out on Bo Bichette and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. this year in the next 365 days, and one of those two guys are going to walk in free agency for nothing. The Blue Jays royally screwed up. They had a lot of promise. They had a lot of promising stars, including those two guys. They took swings. They made effort, and they brought in Kevin Gausman a couple years ago, and they had teams that I expected to be good. Bullpen issues plagued them last year. Injury issues have plagued them in the past. I think this is the demise of the Blue Jays, the final death knell for the Toronto Blue Jays as we know it. And next year, the Blue Jays are going to look like an entirely different team. And I don't think it's going to be in a good direction. So I think my bold prediction in the American League this year is that the Toronto Blue Jays lose at least one of Vlad and Bo Bichette in the offseason for free and trade the other one at the trade deadline. All right, I just want to send a quick shout out to everybody watching on our streaming services, on Roku and Samsung and all of our other streaming services. Head on over to allphly.com to watch the remainder of the show. Again, thank you for hanging out with us here on the PHLY Phillies podcast. I want to end today on a promising note, on a happy note, and something that is near and dear to my heart. As many of you know, and as you can tell by the hoodie that I'm wearing today, I am a proud alum of Penn State University. And one of the things that Penn State does that is a cause that means a lot to me. And it is the charitable donation of my choice, and is one that I give to on a yearly basis. And I appreciate everybody that does. I'm not going to ask you for monetary donations, but THON happened this weekend. And Andrew, if you could post this graphic for me. This is the total that was raised at THON. For those of you that don't know what THON is a 46-hour, no sitting, no sleeping dance marathon that is held at the Bryce Jordan Center at Penn State each year. And what the money goes to is to pediatric cancer research each and every year. THON and Penn State have paired with the Four Diamonds Fund and Hershey Medical Center specifically to raise this money each and every year. There are hundreds of dancers in the pit of the Bryce Jordan Center, and thousands of fans in the stands. Nobody sits, nobody sleeps. Well, let me rephrase that. Nobody sits at the Bryce Jordan Center. The dancers for 46 hours don't sleep. This is a collective year-round effort by thousands of people who do incredible work. I am honored for 4 years to have been a part of this in a very, very small sample size. I am one of thousands and thousands and thousands of Penn State alum and people who love this cause, who have been a part of this. It is something that I hold very, very dear to my heart. And that $17+ million that you saw raised this past calendar year is the most money in a calendar year that THON has ever raised. $17,737,040.93 to be exact. I am so proud of this event. I am so proud of every single person who stands with THON. I am so proud of every single person that has come through as an alum, as a state college resident. And what I love about THON the most, equally to the money that is raised to help children with pediatric cancer, to raise awareness and funds and research for children with pediatric cancer. One of the most touching moments of THON for me is the ability to see the kids and their family have a weekend where they just get to be families, where they just get to be kids, where they get to sing and dance and play games and be just, a kid on a weekend with their family, their committees that they're paired with. And you have lasting bonds with these families that will never, ever go away. I am just so, so grateful for everybody that has been a part of THON over the last 40 plus years now since THON has begun. And another just awe-inspiring weekend for everybody involved. So I wanted to end today's show with that. There's a lot of bad in the world, but I promise you there is a lot of good in the world. And to me, THON is my ultimate good. And I am so, so proud of everybody that has been involved with THON over the last, however many decades since it began at Penn State all those years ago. All right, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of those involved with that. That is how we will wrap up today's show here on the PHLY at Phillies podcast. Thank you so much for hanging out with us here. We'll be back with you live on Friday, but in the interim, we will have a couple of short form videos for you on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. A big shout out to Andrew Frazier, as always, for producing today's show. Again, Pat Ryan, K-Red, Chris Slemmer, everybody that was in the chat, Frank Barber, thank you all for tuning in today. And of course, if you didn't get a chance to watch live, you can catch us anytime you want on demand on YouTube. And of course, you can catch the audio podcast on all of your podcast streaming services. Thank you so much to everybody for hanging out with us. We'll be back Friday at 1 o'clock for our hour-long podcast. Hope to chat with Jim Salisbury. May have another couple of great content creators lined up for you as well. But in that meantime, stay safe. Have a great Monday afternoon, and we'll talk to you on Friday right here on PHLY.
We all silly like the mayor.